Hello everyone, Stoney here. In the previous video we built the armour for the torso. Now we will finish off the suit with van braces, greaves and a helmet. I'm not going to go into too much detail as the construction techniques have already been covered previously. We'll start with the van braces. Because of the way foam stretches when it's bent, it's very difficult to judge the size of curved pieces. To get an accurate measurement, use a thin length of foam and wrap it loosely around the arm to mark where it overlaps. When you straighten the foam out, you can then measure the length and use this for your patterns, and don't forget to add a few centimeters for clearance. I'm extending the van brace over the elbow, so I need to cut a relief so the arms can bend. I want to put a slight crease on the elbow for appearances, but rather than cut it completely through, I'm just cutting a narrow channel about halfway through the foam and gluing it together on the inside. I've cut the recess for the Velcro before bending the piece, as it's a lot easier to cut the foam while it's flat. Tape the piece securely together, then heat it up to form the bend, but be very careful that you don't heat the glue up too much or it will release. This design uses two straps to hold it together, but if you want you can glue it into a tube and glue some pieces of soft foam to the inside to take up the slack. Just make sure the openings are big enough to get the kids' hands through. I'm making the greaves in two pieces, a shin plate and a knee plate. This will create a bit of extra room for the kneecap to help stop it rubbing. The shin plate will wrap completely around the leg and attach at the back. I'm also extending the shin plate down over the ankles to help the greaves sit in the correct position while moving. The knee plate is overly large as I plan to do a bit of detail work on them. It's designed to cover the front of the knees and continue around the outside of the leg, but not the inside. Kids have enough trouble walking and you don't want anything that could catch and trip them over. The greaves should be loose enough to allow for a bit of muscle expansion while they walk, and fall back into the correct position when at rest. You should also make sure there's a bit of a gap with the skirt so it doesn't catch while they're moving. Now for the helmet. This design is a bit sinister looking, but it's also a bit easier to build than some of the other designs. Use a thin piece of foam to measure out the rough dimensions, like what you did for the arms and legs, then test your pattern on your model to see where you need to make adjustments. Also, don't stick pins into your kid's head when testing the look and fit because they won't hold still. Instead, use some temporary tape to hold the pieces of the pattern together. Helmets are really hard to get the shape and look right, so don't be afraid to have a couple of goes at it. Even if you have to rebuild the entire helm, it's better to get it right as it's a focus point for the whole costume. I built the barrel and glued it all together, then used it to trace out a pattern for the cap piece. Note that I put a strong crease down the centre of the face and mouth pieces. If the curvature of the outside isn't quite right, you can adjust the shape of the cap to force it into the right position. I put a bit of a dome on the cap piece to help it sit on the head, plus I like the way it looks. If the helmet sits a bit low, you can glue some soft foam to the inside to lift it up a bit. If it's sitting high, then you may need to modify the design. The finished design should be loose and sit naturally in the correct position. If you have problems with rubbing, especially around the ears, you can pad it with some soft foam, make a skull cap, or even use a ski mask. This concludes part 3 of this series. In the next video, we will add the detailing and paint the costume.